Welcome aboard. This is Phil Wilson for Thursday live briefing. And I want to go over a number of different aspects of maritime history. And I want to start off with the first combat vessels. And I'm going to do little clips on reading to you about the vessels that we're going to be looking at today. And with that, let me turn to my script and my notes, and let's get started. So this is about the first type of combat vessels. If we go back to the very beginning of naval warfare, the first combat vessels were not glamorous in the modern sense. They were practical craft adapted for raiding, defense, transport, and attack. The earliest combat boats were often ordinary vessels that had been modified so armed men could fight from them. These might have been dugouts, rafts, reed craft, or other simple boats that people already used for travel and fishing. The difference was that now they were being used as tools of conflict. Some of the earliest recorded warships appeared in ancient Egypt, especially along the Nile. These early fighting boats became as simple river craft and gradually evolved into sturdier vessels fitted with oars, sails, fighting positions, and room for archers or spear throwers. In some cases, they may also have carried projecting structures used to strike enemy craft. One of the most important developments in maritime history was the separation of the cargo-carrying vessel from the fighting vessel. The warship became longer, narrower, faster, and more agile than the merchant ship. Speed, maneuverability, and capability mattered more than carrying goods. For many centuries, the classic combat vessel was the galley, and refer to the posting that I put in our Nautical Me community, where you'll see a picture of the galley and then later the trireme that we'll be discussing as well. Galleys used oars for tactical control and could also use sails when cruising. Their design made them ideal for coastal fighting, sudden attacks, ramming, and boarding. They were among the first great purpose-built families of warships, and they were specifically popular in the northern area of Africa as well as around the Mediterranean. They were specifically excellent in times of was no wind whatsoever, and they could take ships that had no wind to carry them away from, let's say, the Barbary pirates, for instance. As naval warfare advanced, warships became more specialized. The bireme, with two banks of oars, emerged as an important early warship. Then came the trireme, with three banks of oars, which became one of the defining warships of ancient Mediterranean. It was fast, aggressive, and designed for shock action, especially ramming. These early combat ships fought mainly in three ways: ramming, missile fire from archers or spear throwers, and boarding by soldiers or marines. They were built for action, not comfort. They were usually crowded, light, and optimized for speed and violence rather than long voyages or cargo. By the classical era, fleets were using larger and more varied fighting ships. Naval powers refined the art of combining speed, impact, and boarding tactics. Over time, warships became more sharply distinct from merchant ships in hull form, layout, and purpose. So when we ask about the first types of combat vessels, the answer is not one single boat, but a progression. First, adapted everyday craft, then early Egyptian and Mediterranean fighting boats, then galleys, and then more specialized oared warships like the bireme and the trireme. The great lesson is simple. War at sea began when people realized that a boat could be shaped not merely to travel, but also to fight. Now I want to turn to a reflection of a joke that I often tell my friends here on Nautical Me, which is when I grew up, I started sailing in small boats and catboats and racing with my dad and my sister. And the joke in the family was yes, we had to spend another day racing under Captain Bligh. A story that I'd like to read to you about Captain Bligh. And brings back reflections of not only my dad, who was on nautical seamanship, but the stories about Ramage or the other books, Rachel Hornblower, and so on. So Captain Bligh as a reflection. It would have likely been a hard, exacting, sometimes miserable apprenticeship, but also the sort that could make a first rate seaman out of a man who survived it. If my father truly had a Captain Bligh temperament, and I were his master's mate in the area of wooden ships and iron men, my life would not have been that of a charming officer strolling the quarterdeck with a telescope under his arm. It would have been something much sterner. I would live under a commander who expected the ship to run tightly, smartly, and without excuse. He would notice everything: a slovenly coil of rope, a late watch relief, a sail badly trimmed, a muddled report from the deck, a lazy hand at the braces. All of it would be seen and all of it remembered. That sort of captain did not merely command the ship, he pressed his will into every timber of it. If I were a master's mate, I would stand in an uncomfortable middle ground. I would not be one of the common hands, but neither would I be free of labor or blame. I would be expected to understand practical seamanship in detail: courses, soundings, helm orders, anchors, cables, sail handling, stowage, watches, and boat work. I would carry orders, supervise men, verify that work went properly, and then answer for failures whether or not they were entirely my own. And that is the hard part. Under such a captain, I would often be blamed from both directions. The men might think me too close to authority. The captain might think me too soft on the men. If the watch were sloppy, if the log were wrong, maneuver were slow, if discipline sagged, I could expect a sharp public dressing down. Theatrical fury every hour, perhaps, but the constant strain of knowing that incompetence, carelessness, or even bad luck might bring humiliation. I would also have to master the art of reporting upward, not too wordy, not too vague, not defensive. A captain of that sort would want facts: wind direction, sail state, bearing, depth, damage, delay, missing stores, names of men at fault, what had been done, and what to do. The wrong tone could be as dangerous as the wrong information. He might despise excuses more than errors. At sea, daily life would be relentless. Watches, damp clothing, poor sleep, salt air, cramped quarters, and constant duty. During heavy weather, my position would become worse. I would be expected to stay steady when everyone else was soaked, frightened, exhausted, and perhaps half angry with the entire chain of command. If my father were Captain Bligh in spirit, he might drive the ship hard and expect me to do the same. Reef earlier, hand sail faster, keep the men moving, keep standards up, and show no softness merely because the sea was ugly. Yet there is another side to it. A captain like that, harsh as he might be, could make a man extraordinarily capable. Under him, I would learn precision. I would learn that a ship is not run on general feelings, exactness, timing, observation, and nerve. I would learn how quickly disorder at sea becomes danger. I would learn that leadership is not warmth alone. In that world, leadership was often competence first, fairness second, distant third. True Bligh type. He might not be easy to love, but he might be impossible not to respect if he were also technically brilliant. History's hardest captains were often remembered with a kind, bitter admiration by the men who cursed them at the time. They could be tyrannical in manner and yet utterly dependable in storm, navigation, and survival. A mate serving under such a man might well say he was the devil to work for, but he knew his business. So, what would it really feel like? I would wake tense, I would speak carefully, I would work hard, I would learn fast, I would be corrected often, I would dread being called aft, I would probably become very competent, and years later, I might tell the story with equal parts resentment, pride, and reluctant affection. In other words, if my father, as Captain Bligh, ran a small catboat with the same spirit, then I was not merely out for a pleasant sail. I was serving as an early apprenticeship in command pressure, seamanship, and the old naval truth that the sea forgives very little and neither do certain captains. Now, on to our next section. Let's look at some nautical terms. I want to first go over the two terms pintle and gudgeon at the helm challenge. Pintle and gudgeon are the paired fittings rudder to hang from and pivot on the stern of a boat or ship. The pintle is the pin-like part, and the gudgeon is the socket or strap fitting that receives it. Together, they form the hinge system that lets the rudder swing for steering. The next term that comes up is the term for the projection of a aspect of a large seagoing ship, which has what is called a bulbous bow. Bulbous bow, spelled B-U-L-B-O-U-S, bulbous. A bulbous bow is the rounded projection below the waterline at the forward end of many ships. It is designed to improve hydrodynamic efficiency by reducing wave action and wave making resistance and helping the vessel move more efficiently through the water. It may look unusual, but it is a serious engineering feature and used especially on larger ships. Next, let's turn to the discussion that we had last week on the USS Texas. I wanted to come back to the USS Texas because I didn't really give you enough details on the ship itself, really revisit this topic. So, last week we touched on the age of the great fighting ships, and today I want to focus on one of the most important survivors of that era, the USS Texas. She is not just an old battleship. She is the last surviving dreadnought battleship in the world, a veteran of both World War I and World War II, and the last remaining battleship that took part in the Normandy landings on D-Day. That alone makes her a floating monument to one of the most dramatic naval centuries in history. When the USS Texas entered the service in 1910s, battleships were the cutting edge of national power. A ship. It was a statement of industrial strength, naval ambition, and global reach. Texas belonged to that revolutionary generation of all big gun battleships that changed naval warfare by emphasizing heavy guns, armor, and long range firepower. What makes the USS Texas especially compelling is not only that she survived, but that she remained relevant through enormous changes in warfare. Over her long career, the ship was associated with major advances in gunnery, naval aviation, and radar. In other words, Texas helps us trace the arc from the old world of heavy steel gun platforms into the more modern era of integrated naval technology. In World War I, Texas represented American sea power in an era when the battleship still stood at the center of naval strategy. In World War II, she proved her value again, supporting Allied operations and becoming part of the massive combined effort that shaped victory. Her participation in D-Day gives her a particularly emotional place in history because she was there during one of the defining operations of the 20th century. The reason people still care so deeply about USS Texas is that she is no mere relic. She is the last physical witness of a vanished class of warship that once dominated the oceans. When we look at her, we are not just seeing steel and rivets. We are seeing the age when nations believed command of the sea could be decided by armor, gunnery, nerve, and endurance. And she is not just a museum memory. Texas is part of a living story of restoration and preservation. She reminds us that history is not only something we read about, sometimes it still floats. So the real lesson of the USS Texas is this. She connects the age of dreadnought rivalry, the world wars, and modern preservation in one extraordinary hull. She stands as proof that naval history is not abstract. It can still be seen, visited, and remembered.